hello everyone, and welcome to our special panel, Kids Love Science. I am Catherine Powers, the Assistant Director of the Ohioana Library, and I am so excited to be here today for this discussion on STEM books for children. This program is in partnership with the 2022 Ohioana Book Festival and brought to you by Cover to Cover Books for Young Readers. The festival is going to be a three-day virtual weekend of literary fun that's taking place April 29th through May 1st, and today is one of our kickoff events. So before we get started, we'd like to thank our festival sponsors and partners, all of whom you can find listed on the Ohioana website. And Cover to Cover has been a festival partner for many years now, and we're always so grateful for their support. Cover to Cover always knows what's new in the world of literature for children, tweens, and teens, and they have a special talent for recommending the perfect book for any type of reader. So with that, I will turn things over to Bryan Loar, Cover to Cover's General Manager, who will be leading today's panel discussion. Thank you so much, Bryan.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Catherine. And thank you all for being here today. It's really just a joy. As Catherine mentioned, I'm the general manager of Cover to Cover Children's Books. We're a bit of an institution here in Columbus, Ohio. We've been open for more than 40 years. And we create a safe, welcoming space for all. And today I'm joined by three of our four incredible authors and so excited to introduce you to them. So with that, thank you again, Lisa, Mary Kay, and Kerrie for being here. I'm just going to show your book real quick, and then we'll kind of jump right into things. So we have Lisa Amstutz. She is joining us, and her book that's being featured today is Mammal Mania. And because I'm using green screen, it's kind of interesting the way that it shows up. I'm going to show you an interior. We are also joined by Mary Kay Carson of Animal Watching, the Definitive Nature Guide. This is under the Outdoor School series. And then we have Kerrie Logan Hollihan. She is the creator of this beautiful Bones Unearthed. And this is part of the creepy, and I always want to say but it's creepy and true series. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us.
Absolutely. Well, Lisa, why don't we start off with you? Tell us a little bit about yourself, and were you always drawn to science as a kid or something else?
Yeah, I actually was. My dad was a professor of entomology, which is the study of bugs. And so he took us on a lot of bug hunting expeditions and things like that. And I think just kind of imparted this sort of love of nature and curiosity and yeah, just the way of noticing small things to us kids. My parents also both grew up on farms, and they never quite lost that. So we dabbled in things like raising Christmas trees and pumpkins and honey and stuff throughout my childhood. So that was a lot of kind of hands-on science experience too. I loved science when I was in school, and I majored in biology in college and ecology in grad school. And so, yeah, it's been kind of a lifelong love. And then I veered off into writing because books were my other love, and I found a way to combine them both in writing about science for kids. So that's been really fun.
Well, that just sounds perfect. And what an incredible upbringing as well with that type of exposure. So thank you for sharing. Mary Kay, how about for you?
You know, I was one of those, and everybody knows them because they're still around today. I was one of those animal kids who just always had, you know, pets and brought home orphaned possum babies and, you know, bottle fed things. And, you know, my parents, we lived in the country, and my parents were, you know, we were part of the feral children generation. And so as long as, you know, we weren't making trouble, we pretty much could do what we wanted. And, you know, so had lots and lots and lots of pets, and was an animal kid, and did 4-H and raised rabbits, and, you know, ended up going to a year of high school at the Cincinnati Zoo, and studied biology in college, and served in the Peace Corps and in a fisheries program. And so when I started to study science writing, I ended up at Scholastic at Super Science Magazine, which is a magazine for upper elementary kids. And so I was able to put my interest in science to work writing for kids.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And how about for you, Kerrie?
I'm not a scientist per se. When I was a kid, we did our fair share of traveling by car, tons of national parks. We weren't like really like big hikers, whatever. I did fish with my dad and so on, but I was more of a big reader, and so I read encyclopedias. I read a lot of books. I read some fiction. I read a little bit of nonfiction. But the older I got, I realized that I wanted to be a history major, which I was in college, and then I decided to go to journalism school. And when I was at journalism school, I took a really, really great course in the history of science. And so for me to learn science was to understand, or was trying to understand it in the background of everything, how it converged and all the networking. So I now say that my books, which are science related, kind of cover like a crossroads, kind of go to the crossroads of history and science. I think the history of practically anything, including scientific things, is kind of what turns me on. And the older I got, as I progressed to become an author, after doing a whole lot of other stuff, and focusing on middle grade kids, I realized that what I wanted to do was kind of like nurture a spark and whatever interested them. And so, of course, that's partly science, and as well as history and all the other aspects of learning. And when I first started to write the book, like Isaac Newton and Physics for Kids, like I am no physicist, but I had a lot of assistance from a lot of people. And fortunately, my editor at Chicago Review Press is an engineer, so he helped me develop some of my thought processes and stuff and so on. And so that's kind of how I got involved. With this Creepy and True series, I wrote a book about mummies exposed, which of course is also not only a history of people and culture and so on, it's also a history of how these people became mummies. And there's multiple ways that are actually scientific study as well as everything else. Then in the third book in the Creepy and True series, Bones Unearthed, is about actual findings of bones of human remains in bone form. And again, you're looking at a lot of things about like DNA and carbon dating and whatnot, that on a certain level, I feel after doing a lot of study and trying to understand it all myself, I feel like I can distill it for a middle grade reader, middle grade, 7th grade, maybe even somewhat 8th grade reader, and also older adults who want something light.
Well, great. Well, Kerrie, you talked about that spark, this idea of curiosity. What are you curious about, and why do you think curiosity is important for writers and scientists?
Well, I kind of feel that like that your innate spark, or what I call that, your curiosity kind of is there within you at about age 11 or 12. I kind of always think about directing my thoughts towards 6th graders. Because I think that whatever you do in life, that's kind of where you are. Like Mary Kay said she was an animal kid, and Lisa said she was out hunting bugs with her dad. Well, guess what? My dad took me places, made me think about a lot of different things. My mom too. And so it's like, so whatever spark you have, I think is there to be nurtured. And I think like focusing on middle grade kids is where you really, really drive toward that. I have a lot of other sparks that may take me down lots of country roads, but this is where, we got other things going on. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for sharing. How about you, Mary Kay? How about that idea of curiosity? Where has that taken you, and why do you think it's important?
Well, I think it's pretty much essential for STEM topics because, the scientific method itself is set up as a question that is either proven or disproved. And so really questions and the curiosity that leads to questions is what science, to me at least, is. And that's what starts the scientific process. And for me personally, I think as writers, as nonfiction writers, we spend most of our time doing research as opposed to fiction writers who might spend most of their time actually drafting and redrafting their manuscript. We spend most of our time by far doing research. And so you can't be motivated to do research and research and research unless you're curious about what it is you're researching. So
have you ever found you going down that path of research and finding that maybe it is the wrong path and needing to switch?
all the time.
Yeah, I can imagine. Lisa, what about curiosity for you? What are you curious about, and why do you think it's important?
Well, I think, like Mary Kay said, I think that is the basis of science, really, is asking questions. And when I think about when my kids were little, as soon as they could talk, it was why, or what's that? Or, all those questions that kids ask, and they wouldn't stop. You have to keep going further and further until you finally reach a point where you just, I don't know. It's just the way it is. But, when you're writing about science, it's kind of the same thing. You keep digging and digging, and when you're doing science, obviously. So for me, I don't know. I have 100 different things I'm curious about, but the problem is always picking one to focus on, and which one is worth pursuing, and which ones aren't, and what's already been done and hasn't, and all that kind of thing too with writing. But so because of my ecology background, I have a lot of interest in sustainability kind of topics and that kind of thing, and so currently working on a sustainability related book with a friend, and finding a lot of questions and answers with that. And birds are another sort of lifelong interest, and so I'm always trying to learn more about birds and their behavior, and just identifying them and those kind of things too. So that's an ongoing one.
Absolutely. Well, as a librarian, and librarians are known for having breadth and some depth, I can feel you in regards to having lots of interests. And so with that, as you're kind of been exploring different things, has anything surprised you when going along with your research, either with your current book or a past book? And that's for you, Lisa. Sorry.
I was gonna say,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I was thinking about that question. I mean, there was a lot of surprising things. I actually did two in this series for Chicago Review Press, the Mammal Mania, and then I did a previous one called Amazing Amphibians. And I think the two things that surprised me most was just the sheer number of different species and just how amazing they are. Like, some of those adaptations are just wild. But then secondly, unfortunately, the extreme threat that a lot of these species are under. And, I mean, I knew this, but in my head, but it just really brought it home to read about how terribly threatened some of these species are by climate change and pollution and all the other, habitat loss, all the other things that are mostly human related. So that was a sadder sort of thing,
right?
But yeah,
but important.
Right.
Absolutely. And to be able to communicate that beyond reading your book, is there anything that you would suggest that we can do in our own lives?
I think just continue to read and educate yourself and learn about what the issues are is always helpful. There's always actions you can take on a small scale near you, just with your own household or local projects and your community. I think most of those kind of solutions start on a small scale. I don't think it's easy to make the world change except for, on an individual level. But.
Yeah, absolutely. Something small that's manageable, and we can each do our own part. Oh, great. Thanks, Lisa. And Mary Kay, in your researching, anything come across as surprising to you?
I'm always find surprising things in my research. In the outdoor school books, the animal watching book, like Lisa, the book has maps, And it's sort of astounding just in my own lifetime to see where some of these animals live. This is just confined to North America, where some of these animals lived, how much it's changed, over my lifetime. And for some other projects that I'm working on right now, it's really, I have a theme of where does wildlife belong? And kids and their generation are going to have to decide, are wild animals just something that live in national parks that you go and visit, or they live in zoos, or are they going to be part of our everyday life? And what does that mean? And what do we lose as a culture? And what ecosystems can actually be naturally and self-sustaining anymore, as human need really just comes to dominate the entire planet.
Absolutely. So that brings up a kind of interesting question. I don't know if you've discussed before, but animal bridges. There are a few children's books out there about that now, but then I just heard on NPR recently. You have any thoughts about those?
I think it's terrific. I mean, I think those things are terrific. And I think, one of there's so much negative news, and so many species, I believe, are going to be lost. And there's probably not anything that can be done about it at this point. But we have a huge, especially in the United States, we have a huge resource in backyard green space. And if people embraced the backyard green space movement, and everybody made their own little patch into decent wildlife habitat, it could be an enormous help to migrating birds and all sorts of wildlife. And, it just takes enough people caring more about the wildlife that has flown all the way from South America to land in the tree in your window than having a perfect chemical lawn, and there's a lot of people working on that movement right now. And that's probably one of the most positive things, and one that kids themselves can, they can put up birdhouses, they can plant native bushes that have food and shelter for birds. These are things that they can do.
Great. Thank you, Mary Kay. And Kerrie, how about for you when going through your research, anything that surprised you?
Well, on reflection, I was thinking about, as everybody's talking, what am I going to talk about here? I'm thinking, well, one of the things that struck me was when I was in high school, this many years ago, DNA was nothing we really learned in biology class. And even in college, I started college in 1969. There was little talk about DNA. And so now, of course, kids, 5th, 6th graders, 7th graders, they know the jargon, they know something about DNA. They've done a little bit of study about it. So I decided to go look up, and I went to the library. Cincinnati Public Library is my go-to library. So went at all the research sections, and I wanted to find out when the letters D and A appeared in the popular literature. And so I looked, and I was like, went back and back and back and back, and I had to set aside all the scholarly journals and everything. And sure enough, there were those 3 letters in the Saturday Evening Post in 1957. But it didn't enter really into like the popular jargon or like people talking about it until the 1980s, I would say. And so you think about, well, how do people learn? What do they focus on? Like they talk about sustainability, which is like a really hot button topic right now. And I'm actually kind of delving into a little bit of study about the tall grass prairie, because that kind of speaks to me. And the kicker is, how do I get people, like Mary Kay said, and Lisa said, to kind of buy into this concept of preserving and conserving what we have in a way that's going to appeal to them. When it's different, it's probably somewhat expensive for many people, all these things. And how do we best reach people as writers and authors and librarians and bookstore sellers and educators, everything else, to kind of get people thinking. I think this whole, okay, I went down to, on Earth Day in 1970, we went down to breakfast in the dorm, and there's this little card sitting there saying, Happy Earth Day. And everybody went, what's Earth Day? Well, that was way a long time ago, like 50 years or so. And now look at it, it's all over the place, it's all over the popular press. So things are evolving in a positive way. And I like to see that. One of the things, frankly, I don't want to go down this whole thing of science versus religion, but I really feel like people need to kind of like come together and understand that there's a spot for both, okay, in study and in reaching out to people and so on. And we don't have to get super technical about it or super one-sided or the other, but we can't discount science in our thinking, is how I see it, even though I also believe in religion. So these are things that I struggle with, and I also struggle to maintain. Like, for example, in Bones, I've got a little section on the development of the human evolution and how this all started out. Because I talk about Neanderthals, I talk about Lucy, the early hominid, all these different things, the human family line. And I'm thinking, well, some people might pick up this book and go, this isn't what I've been told to believe. And I'm thinking, well, there are different ways of understanding and displaying this and talking about it. And this is where I would like to kind of like help bridge that gap in learning and in education.
Absolutely. Those bridges are essential. So thank you. Lisa, I wanted to ask you, you had mentioned earlier this idea of continual question. Maybe you're getting the series of whys, and then you kind of finally hit that moment of, I'm not sure. This is the course that we're going to go down. But let's say that you kind of go down that path and I just wonder, are there limits to what we can know? This kind of speaks a little bit to what you're speaking to, Kerrie. In a way, we could go down that path, but I'm just curious if there are limits as you, as a writer, as somebody who has studied the sciences. Do you think there is a limit to what humans can know?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. My first reaction is to say yes. I mean, we're limited by our senses and what we can experience and take in. But then I think, well, I don't know, because people once thought humans could never fly or could never explore the bottom of the ocean or do all the things, go to the moon, things that we have managed to do. I wrote a book called Brain-Computer Interfaces for an educational publisher, and it was talking about how they're coming up with devices so that people who can't speak can communicate just using brain waves. And so, I think there's things we haven't even imagined yet, but yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting to think about it.
It is kind of like you were bringing up kind of like our physicality to actually witness something. For example, people talk about Schrodinger's cat or whatnot, this idea of like there are things that out there that that maybe some writers and scientists say that they actually have to see it or witness it to mean that it is something that's real. Mary Kay, what about you? Do you think there are any limits to knowledge?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And why? Why is that?
I mean, what is it? 5% of the entire universe is made up of matter, atoms that we can actually, like everyone you've ever seen, every planet, every light, every galaxy, every beam, every piece of radiation is in that 5%. And the rest is dark energy and dark matter, undetectable, that we only know through inference because the universe is expanding. It's like we can't even detect 95% of the universe, much less, begin to understand it. And that's just our universe. And, we're like one carbon-based species in one corner of the Milky Way, and we can't even, like, a chimpanzee is what, 99% the same genetically as us. And you can't even go up to a chimpanzee and say, meet me out front in a half an hour and them be able to understand you, nor can they come up to you and convey what they need. And we're 99% same. It's like, how can we even think? I find the ego behind assuming that we would be able to comprehend or communicate or understand anything, beyond ourselves fairly. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so vast, as you're mentioning. Absolutely. And Kerrie, what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't know a whole lot about virtual reality, but I sometimes wonder whether or not we're so excited about getting into virtual reality that we're just going to try to step away from our own reality. And I don't know how Mary Kay and Lisa feel about that, but when you talk about the fact that we are like genetically just so close to that chimp, and we're like such a pinpoint in this massive, who knows how many universes, that yes, there are limits to our knowledge. And so I don't know whether virtual reality is kind of like I say, trying to, well, let's not worry about what we can do here. Let's go elsewhere and think about what else we could be, pretend to be. Maybe I'm completely naive. I don't know, but that's kind of where I am at this moment.
Yeah, I've seen on both sides, the pros being for virtual or augmented reality, that it is a new way of understanding and learning, versus the idea of kind of what I think the path that you're speaking of, whether it's like a WALL-E scenario or some other dystopian idea that we won't take care of our planet, or we won't take care of each other because we will have all avatars, and everything else will, kind of like with Ready Player One, you have an industrialized, overpopulated and dying planet, but you can go into it with virtual reality.
Yeah.
So I hope that we continue to be able to improve both our relations with each other and our planet. But of course, the jury is still out on that, but that is the hope. Well, Lisa, let's start this a round of questioning in regards to what would you recommend if there are any of members of the audience that is interested in writing or the sciences. What would you recommend to them based on your experiences?
Yeah. Well, I do think it helps if you have some background in the sciences, but I don't think it's necessary. Obviously, Kerrie does a good job here without, a science degree or whatever, but I do think it's important to just do your research and be really careful and methodical. Get experts to review it, because I do that too. It's just, there's things you miss. There's things that I used to do a lot of critiquing, and now I am also work as a literary agent, so I get a lot of submissions, and a lot of the things I see are misusing terminology, or I can tell that the author doesn't quite grasp a concept the right way, or they miss out on the broader picture of things that would have brought in another depth to the story. And so I think if, talking to experts and people who have really studied those particular topics in their field can really help with that. And just, if you're writing nonfiction, I think it's really important that everything is 100% true. You can't fictionalize anything. You can't add stuff. You can't make stuff up. So yeah, that's my general thought.
in regards to that last comment, do you ever find that there are areas, and this speaks to the last questioning in regards to limits of knowledge, do you ever find that there is more of a gray area, maybe that's based on the limits of being able to test something? Do you ever find that?
Yeah, definitely, depending on the subject particularly. There's things that, and scientists disagree about things sometimes. So, sometimes you just have to go with the most recent or the best, what seems like the consensus or the best guess you can. But yeah, definitely.
And because you've reviewed, do you have any thoughts in regards to books versus peer-reviewed journals?
I think as long as it's a book written for adults and it's relatively recent, I think that's fine. I think, peer-reviewed journals are probably the standard as far as in-depth research, but yeah. I wouldn't rely on a children's book or something that's too old or anything like that. And I would look at who the author is and if they are really an expert in what they're writing about too.
Yeah, great. Mary Kay, how about you? What would you recommend based on your experiences?
That, and Lisa might be somebody out to speak to this because she is also a literary agent, but it seems like it's changing some to me. I've been kind of in the business for about 30 years. And when I got in, people could write about science for kids and not really have a science background. And a lot of people came, they were teachers or they were journalists or whatever. And as long as you did your research and all of that, you were good to go. But it seems to me personally that in the last few years, you see more and more books that are being acquired from experts who have written them. And there's new presses out there like the MIT press and all of these things that seek out experts who can write for kids. And that's an interesting development. And it just speaks to even more how the information has to be completely vetted and top-notch research. And it's interesting. It's an interesting development. So I'm interested to see where it goes. As far as people writing science for grownups, I think that definitely takes somebody who is already an expert in their field. To me, at least, the sort of the age of popularizers of scientific information is sort of past, because there's just too much information out there and you just can't be an expert on everything. And I did a science writing program a long time ago at NYU, and the people who went to work in science journalism or whatever, everybody is super specialized at this point. They don't report on science, they report on material science, specifically ceramics, right? It's like, because you can't keep up with the latest findings unless you're specialized. And so that's a nice thing about writing for kids, is that I can write about space and I can write about animals and I can go back and forth. But it'll be interesting to see if that sort of keeps happening, or if the specialization trickles down to to books for kids too.
Yeah, that's kind of a sticky wicket, isn't it?
Mm.
Kind of is. Yeah.
And what about you, Kerrie? What about your thoughts?
Well, I'm thinking about Mary Kay, but then again, she's running from the perspective of having a science background, and I'm not. But I was thinking about the number of experts that I had who had to help vet this book, which is certainly a general look at 10 or 11 different kinds of bony burials. And I had a really gratifying experience asking the asking them to give my manuscript a read, and oftentimes they would actually take part of a chapter where I quote them and stuff, and go back and say, well, actually, it happened this way and happened this way. I had a very lot of help from a gentleman, Dr. Doug Stanton, up at the University of Waterloo in Canada, who helped me write about the Franklin expedition that was lost in the 1840s and 50s, an expedition that came from England over to Canada to try and find the Northwest Passage. And I was dovetailing that story along with the records and the oral traditions from the Inuit people who saw these kind of crazy sailors dragging a boat, a small boat, on a sledge across the ice. And eventually everybody died, everybody starved. There were signs of cannibalism, which horrified everybody back home in England and so on. And there was even a Cincinnati connection, but having help from this gentleman up in Canada helped me a lot. I had another example of like human sacrifice, and I had a delightful FaceTime conversation with an archaeologist in Sweden who was called in before they started building a housing development, and just to do the general like look through the area, and darn if he didn't like uncover a Viking burial. And sure enough, it was obviously like some well-off farmer, and there were several bodies in the grave along with him, which was a big hint that he was a well-to-do farmer, and so people were sacrificed to assist him in the afterlife. And so this gentleman, Ove Hemmendorf, and I had a big conversation, and he, we did a lot of stuff. He wrote some things for me and helped me out a whole lot. We FaceTime and so on, and just got a picture of him with my book reading to his grandchildren in Sweden for his 75th birthday. And it's those kinds of interactions that I have with the experts that actually I hope come across my readers, but for me, they're personally gratifying. They're like, I get a lot out of that as well. And so I'm nurtured as I do this work, which I find which is why I like to do it.
Absolutely. Well, you speak of those partnerships, and Lisa, you had mentioned earlier that you are working on a project and collaborating with somebody else. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And are you able to speak a little bit to that, or could you speak about the more of the partnership aspect, either with this project or any other projects?
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of this, but I did write one other book with someone else, and that was really I really actually liked it because it kind of kept me motivated and moving forward. This particular person I'm working on this other project with is also has a similar background, and so has a lot of great ideas, directions to go that I probably wouldn't have thought of. And so I think, collaborating could be a great way to do that. And sometimes people collaborate with a scientist or something on a science project. That could be another good way. But yeah, I'm always a fan of collaboration when it works. And I think it's two heads are better than one, right?
Yeah, I'm jealous because it's a lonely business. It can be a lonely business. Yeah.
Now, Mary Kay, have you ever done any collaborations, or has it been solitary for you?
I mean, I work with science. I'm working on a 7th book in the Scientists in the Field series, which is books that you go out and you interview scientists while they're working, and then you write about it. So, but we're not really collaborating. You're just sort of there collecting information, and then you go home to your own little desk and write. So I haven't, and that sounds nice.
You're like, you're all for it, right?
It can be hard when it's all you. It's you and you, and if it's gonna be, something's gonna be fixed or right or wrong or uninteresting, it's gonna be you. So it would be nice to have somebody to work with, I would think.
Don't you think, Mary Kay, having a really good editor helps you though? So you don't feel so alone in the process?
Theoretically, yeah.
theoretically, yeah, I know you get. I've been very fortunate, but in the two editors I've had, they've been both Jerry Poland at Chicago Reader Press and then Howard Reeves at Abrams Books for Young Readers, have both been really terrific in pointing me in a lot of different directions that I wouldn't have necessarily gone or thought about, to engage my readers. And that's been a really big bonus for me, but I feel very fortunate in that.
Yeah, and speaking of editors, I kind of want to, possibly this is Pandora's box, but I'll open it up anyway, is the idea of the rise of self-publishing. And we talked a little bit earlier about the idea of having a vetting process. So I'm curious if you've seen it, because we've seen in the bookstore world, from fiction mainly, the rise of self-publishing, which there have been some great products that have come about because of barriers no longer being there, specifically with people of color. But I'm just kind of curious how that has or has not entered the sciences and writing for children. Any thoughts from either of you or any of you?
Lisa might be able to speak to this a little more as a literary agent, but when I think of self-publishing, I think of fiction, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there's not that much money in nonfiction. And I think also nonfiction, especially for young kids, is very expensive to do because of the illustrations or photographs or whatever. And I haven't really seen, that much nonfiction that's self-published beyond, sort of teacher-made materials and things like that. I don't know, Lisa, have you seen a lot of self-published nonfiction? Science, history maybe, but science, it's like, yeah, you see biographies, stuff like that, but real science?
Not really. It's expensive. It's expensive. Yeah, the color photos or color images or whatever. We can go down a long road about photo reimbursement and so on, whether you get, whether they give you a photo budget, the publisher, or whether you basically have to pay for photos on your own. I've had multiple experiences with that. And so I would think to do like a 4-color book, like all you see here, to self-publish that would really be a lot of cash input up front, a lot. So
yeah, I think it's more challenging with any children's book, with any picture book, at least for sure, and children's books in general. I see Gloria Adams is on here, and I know she's done some successful books with self-publishing. And I think self-published books, it's a great option. It can be for some people, if you're good at marketing and that kind of thing, and you want to have that control, I think it's a great option. I think maybe in the past they had a bit of a stigma just because sometimes people didn't always take time to get them thoroughly edited or vetted, but I think there's a lot more options for that now too. Freelance editors you can find and that kind of thing, critique partners so, but it's a different, I don't necessarily recommend somebody self-publish just because they can't get a book published, because I think it's a different marketing mindset that you have to come into it with. And I think it's a valid option.
Mm-hmm. And it depends. For me, it's about what your goals are. I feel like there's a lot of people who have sort of one story in their heart that they want out there in the world. And that's very different from, I want to build a career in publishing. So.
Yeah, we definitely see that, particularly, for example, with memoirs.
Yeah. Or, a family story, especially about, I know somebody who had, wonderful set of letters between, I think they were probably great grandparents exchanged during World War I, or, something like that. It's of limited interest to a national audience, perhaps. I mean, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but but something like that, I think is super appropriate for self-publishing. But
Yeah.
Well, we have a question from Kerrie that I want to make sure that we get to, and that is, are kids in this age group generally drawn to fact-driven survey books or more storytelling narrative structure or something else?
That's for me.
That is
Oh,
for all of you. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
what age group do they mean exactly?
Well, Kerrie, if you want to put it into the chat, what age group you're thinking of.
I think this is a huge debate
Oh, yeah.
among nonfiction writers, and I think the answer is some kids like stories and some kids like facts, and we all know this, right? We all know kids who have 15 books about dinosaurs, you know, and we all know kids who have storybooks, and so I think it's you know, just like some kids are visual learners and some kids learn better by listening, you know, there has to be some of everything because not everybody's the same.
And Kerrie responded in regards to 4th to 8th grades.
Oh, okay.
Melissa Stewart has done some interesting research on that question, and I think her conclusion was that kids actually like more expository books, but what gets published is more the narrative style because that's what editors and other adults seem to like better. So, and I find that too, that's what editors seem to be looking for more commonly. But yeah, kids like those, you know, those
You bet.
survey books where you know, the National Geographic ones or the Ripley's Believe It or Not or whatever it is that they just have all the factoids.
What animal jumps highest, and you know, what bug squirts the stinkiest stuff, you know.
But her blog is a really good resource if you want to read more about that question. So, Melissa Stewart.
Well, Melissa has done a really good job of identifying all these various, I think she has 5 different categories of nonfiction, I believe. And some of us, I guess I'd be considered a narrative nonfiction author, but within the narrative, I try to include little nuggets of information, like in my mummy book, you know, I explain what an anaerobic burial is. You know, in other words, burial, there's no oxygen involved, and what happens there. And then other like words come up, like, you know, desiccated and dried out, different things. And so I try to like put little, like almost like formulas or little like pieces of little like word formulas that say this plus this equals this, which isn't exactly like expository, but hopefully leaves a little bit of an impression in that fashion with the reader. So does that make any sense, Lisa and Mary Kay?
Yeah, I mean, you can have I think the question is about, do kids want to open up a book on page 1 and read a narrative, or do they want to browse and flip through and find facts? And I think, again, the answer is it depends on the kid. It depends on why the kid is reading the book, you know, if it's for a report or for their own personal interest. And again, I think there just needs to be different formats and kinds of books so that all kids feel like there's something that interests them.
And photographs, you know, photographs sometimes I think will draw a more, I don't want to say necessarily reluctant reader, but you know, when you put an image in, I don't know if this even shows, but there's a researcher opening up I believe a cadaver, can't really tell, but sometimes I think kids pick up a book and they go, oh, what is that? And you know what? It's sitting right there on the page where you can learn about it. And that's one thing that design uses together with, in cooperation with the author, to make sure that all this kind of like does draw a kid in who wants to find something about what he sees or she sees. So.
Right. And some kids pick up a Steve Schenken book, and it's, 300 pages of text, and they're like, wow, it's totally overwhelming for me. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it's just different kids.
And Kerrie asked a follow-up question. Are there any areas of STEM topics that schools or publishers have been looking for recently, like holes in the industry?
Math.
How so, Mary Kay?
Math, just math.
In general, I mean, just writing about math?
Anything about, it's like kind of the STEM, engineering. Wouldn't you say, Lisa, engineering and math are probably the least served, and math even more so, because it's hard to, it's a hard thing to write about.
Yeah, I would agree. The hard sciences in general. I think people tend to write about animals and plants and things more so. So there's more need for
Right.
the rest of that STEM. Yeah.
Earth science and physical science. So anything physics, math.
And if you can make a curriculum tie-in, I think that's always helpful for publishers, that's another marketing avenue they can use if it ties in with some of the state standards or the, next generation standards or whatever it is that
Right.
schools are using. That's always helpful. So if you're thinking about a topic and it's something they don't study till 8th grade, it's probably not the best one to write about for 3rd graders, but if you can kind of look at that a little bit, I think that's helpful too.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and speaking of math, one of our, now I'm going to butcher the title because I don't have it in front of me, but it's something along the lines of Math, What Do I Need That For? It's a beautiful hardcover book, maybe published by DK, but that one always kind of grabs people's attention. So, and that's one of the few ones that we've pulled that that speaks to math in general, but also it kind of excites people because they pick it up and say, oh, I've thought this all my life. And then they kind of peek into it. So having a hook like that, it's also a great way to sell your books.
Yeah.
We have just a few minutes left here today. We have time for one more question if somebody wants to put that into the chat. Otherwise, I would like to ask, as I kind of give pause to any other questions that anybody else that might have thought about, how can people find each of you? Lisa, let's start with you.
Yeah, you can go on my website, lisaamstutz.com, and I have links there to all my other social media and that kind of thing. So that's probably the easiest.
Perfect. And Mary Kay?
Yeah, my website is just my name spelled out.com, marykcarson.com, and it's also a good starting point.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And how about for you, Kerrie?
Same thing for me, Hollihan.com. So
Well,
there's a lot of links there too. Yep. So, and I think it'll be linking about Ohioana today or tomorrow. Yeah. Doing that. Yeah. So.
Well, perfect. Well, you can find Cover to Cover at covertocoverchildrensbooks.com as well. Again, I want to thank everybody that's been here today. Thank you so much to the audience, and thank you to Lisa, Mary Kay, and Kerrie. What a pleasure it's been to chat with you. So thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Bryan.
you, Bryan.
Thank you. This was really fun to speak with you all today.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
thank you so much.
And thank you all so much again, just popping in to say that this was just, fantastic. And a huge thank you to our panelists here. We've got Lisa Amstutz and Mary Kay Carson and Kerrie Logan Hollihan. Bryan Loar, thank you for being our wonderful moderator today. And as well, Cover to Cover Books for Young Readers for hosting this fantastic event. This was just so much fun and super informative too. And we had such great questions come up in the chat. Thank you, everybody, for posting those in there. STEM topics are just, so there's both important and fascinating. So do grab these authors' books for the young readers in your life who are curious about animals, nature, forensics, anthropology, and having a positive impact on the world. So thank you also again to all of the Ohioana Book Festival sponsors and partners, and thank you all for joining us today. Remember to check out the Ohioana website for this year's full schedule of programs, panels, and kids activities, including recording links for anything you may have missed or programs that you'll want to watch again. So thank you all so much and happy reading.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.